What's going on, guys? This is VinylicPuma, back with another Borderlands video, and today I wanted to talk about Borderlands 3 and why I think a lot of the concerns about it are probably not as big of a deal as some of them are being made out to be. Now, before we start, I obviously can't predict the future, but based on some things that I've seen and read involving Borderlands 3 over these past couple of years, I think I can put at least a few concerns about the game to rest. Personally, I will admit that I'm at least a little apprehensive about Borderlands 3, especially with the unmitigated disaster we just saw happen with Fallout 76, but I would venture to say that Borderlands 3 probably isn't going to turn out that way. But I guess without further ado, let's just go ahead and dive in and talk about why I am cautiously optimistic about Borderlands 3. According to a lot of information that's been coming out over the past couple of years or so, it would at least seem like Borderlands 3 will be far more like previous titles rather than an always online game like Destiny, The Division, or Anthem. Specifically, Randy Pitchford has hinted at how Borderlands 3 will have offline modes, the game will feature 4-player co-op and likely no PvP based on a response Randy gave to Michael Pachter, and when it comes to microtransactions, Randy has at least said before that he is very much against predatory monetization schemes in premium games, and pointed to some situations to where they could have been implemented in Borderlands 2, but they chose not to. While I do have some concerns around Borderlands 3's monetization, since Battleborn apparently does allow you to purchase XP and loot boosters, I do think the other tweets in particular are a good sign that Borderlands 3 is going to be more like what most people want from a Borderlands game, rather than following a lot of industry trends like Destiny, The Division, and Anthem did. And overall, I think Borderlands 3 will end up being a much better game for it. Also, and Battleborn's XP boosters aside, I think it's worth mentioning that Gearbox historically has been a lot better with their DLC and post-launch content offerings than many other publishers and developers. Battleborn's original business model offered the game for $60, along with a $20 season pass, and provided that you went that route, you pretty much got everything in the game. Borderlands 2 was pretty similar in that regard since the base game was $60, the season pass was $30, and additional DLC like Digistruct Peak, along with Gage and Krieg, were offered as separate DLC. There were also microtransactions with Borderlands 2, being the head and skin packs for each character, which did eventually come to purchasers of the Anthem collection for free, and PC users can get them all for a discount if they purchase the Anthem collection bundle on Steam. With all of this in mind, and while the past doesn't always predict the future, my thinking is that Borderlands 3 could be a lot like Borderlands 2 in terms of its business model. While I will admit that it's true that Take-Two CEO Strauss Zelnick has been quoted talking about recurrent consumer spending opportunities or microtransactions being in all future 2K and Rockstar titles, it is worth mentioning he has also been quoted saying this in an old GamesIndustry.biz article. Well, Borderlands had 9 paid downloadable content packs, so recurrent consumer spending isn't only in-game payments or virtual currency, it also means downloadable content. For example, Civilization titles have DLC, Mafia 3 has DLC, which is still generating revenue to this day. Our goal is always to engage the customer after the initial release. The type of engagement is going to vary product to product. We're not focused on driving that engagement so we can monetize. We're focused on entertaining the consumer because that's what keeps them involved with our products. And then that engagement will naturally lead to revenue and profit if we do it properly. While I think it's worth mentioning that this was during a conversation with GamesIndustry.biz rather than something said to investors, it does seem to suggest Borderlands 3 could have a more traditional monetization model. I guess we'll see once the game finally gets announced and released, but I don't think Borderlands 3 is going to be like GTA Online, where you have $60 vehicles, or like Call of Duty or Overwatch, where you have microtransaction loot boxes. This next thing I want to talk about is going to be anecdotal, but I also feel a little bit better about some of the departures of key Gearbox staff that were heavily involved with Borderlands after hearing the voice of the new Claptrap in Borderlands 2 VR. I'll go ahead and I'll play a clip of a portion of it at the beginning of the game, so you can hear the differences between David Edding's Claptrap and what I guess will be Claptrap's new voice actor, Jim Ferronda.
Allow me to introduce myself. I am a CL4P TP steward bot. but my friends call me Claptrap. Or they would if any of them were still alive, or had existed in the first place. Oh, I've got something for you. Here, take this echo communicator that I totally didn't loot from one of these corpses. It comes with a Class 12 heads-up display, complete with a mini-map. Now, come, friend, let's get you inside.
Hey, wait a minute! Lucky you! You've got your hands on a very special virtual echo that lets you interact differently with reality. Whatever that is. Here, I'll show you how to use it. Don't feel embarrassed if you can't remember how to move. You've probably got severe head trauma! Your virtual echo includes a button-based interface known as an echo pad. To walk, just look where you want to go and use the movement input on your echo pad.
While I think a part of me prefers David Eddings since I'm so used to how that version of Claptrap sounds, I've got to admit that I like Jim Ferranda's version of Claptrap too. I think it's pretty close to David Eddings' work while also being different, and overall, I think Jim did a pretty good job and his style would be something that I could get used to. Even if the differences in voices in the early parts of Borderlands 2 VR can be a little jarring at times, due to the differences between actors and volume levels of the older and newer voiceovers. The reason I mentioned Claptrap's voice, though, is that I was concerned about the departure of many key people that were involved with Borderlands. After all, Matt Armstrong, Mikey Newman, Anthony Birch, and of course David Eddings all left Gearbox in the last several years. However, after finally hearing Claptrap's new voice in game, I think I feel a bit better about some of the other departures in the sense that they're being filled by what seems like very capable people. Granted, I certainly think some things remain to be seen, but I think the new Claptrap voice is good, and may be a sign we don't have to worry as much about some of the high-profile departures from Gearbox that have occurred in the last couple years. Something else that I think is worth considering is that Borderlands 3 is really Gearbox's last major franchise in the AAA space. With that in mind, Gearbox is likely very motivated to put out the best game that they possibly can, as Borderlands 3 has a lot to prove given Gearbox's recent track record of releases. After all, Aliens Colonial Marines and Battleborn didn't do so hot, with the former being a disaster, while the other had the unfortunate situation of going up against Overwatch, which was one of the most anticipated titles of 2016. I don't think Gearbox is going to make the same mistakes with Borderlands 3 that they made with those two games. In fact, I think a big reason Borderlands 3 got delayed was in part because they wanted to avoid sharing the spotlight with Anthem and The Division 2. After all, Borderlands 3 was originally slated for a fiscal year 2019 release, which would have fit that Q1 2019 window that both Anthem and The Division 2 are also releasing in. Something else to consider is that while it wasn't developed by Gearbox, the Borderlands franchise is also coming off of the pre-sequel, which, while not a bad game, I think we can all agree it wasn't as good as Borderlands 2. Gearbox is going to want to show that they can make a better game than 2K Australia did, and I think that will also motivate them to put out the best Borderlands game that they can. Ultimately, my thinking is that Gearbox is going to be putting in their best efforts with Borderlands 3. Plus, I think we've seen what Gearbox's best efforts can achieve, being both Borderlands 2 itself, as well as the Dragon Keep DLC for Borderlands 2. Both of these were excellent, and if they can achieve this level of quality with Borderlands 3, then I think Borderlands 3 is going to be a major success. Now, for the majority of this video, I've been fairly positive, because I do think based on what I've seen that Borderlands 3 will likely be a game that's more like Borderlands 2 was. That said, I think if you're wondering when you should really start to be worried about Borderlands 3, what I would recommend you look out for is if Borderlands 3 is starting to look a lot like Fallout 76 did after that game's reveal. More specifically, let's say Borderlands 3's teaser trailer comes out and then you suddenly hear stories that the game isn't what it seems. Sort of like what happened with Fallout 76, in that no one had any reason to suspect Fallout 76 wasn't a single-player game, only for Jason Schreier of Kotaku to reveal that Fallout 76 was an online multiplayer game, which ended up getting confirmed by Bethesda at E3 a week or two afterward. If something similar or a scenario like what unfolded with Fallout 76 seems to be occurring with Borderlands 3, then I think that's definitely when you should start to get worried. With that in mind, though, I think Gearbox, at least up to this point, has been more direct in their communication about what Borderlands 3 is going to be when compared to Bethesda with Fallout 76. After all, the previously mentioned tweets of Randy mentioning that the game will have 4-player co-op and an offline mode are great examples. I also think Randy knows that by making those comments, he also knows how the fans are going to interpret it, as many of the hardcore fans are expecting the things he mentions in his tweets to be consistent with the final game. I suppose on the one hand, it would be good if it turns out Borderlands 3 has something like 6-player co-op, but on the other hand, I think, at least speaking for myself, that I would be kind of upset if it turns out there actually isn't an offline mode when it's been hinted at before. In the end, and going back to the Fallout 76 example though, I think if you see similarities to that game's reveal with Borderlands 3, then that is when I would say you should be worried. I don't think that's going to happen, or at least I hope it doesn't happen, as I don't want another one of my favorite franchises to go into the gutter. But what I would say is, based on what I am currently seeing, it doesn't look like that's going to happen. In the end, I think I feel pretty good about Borderlands 3, and I'm looking forward to that Q1 or Q2 reveal sometime next year. But until next time, guys, I think that's going to wrap up this particular video. If you liked this video, feel free to leave a like, click the bell so you can be notified when I upload more videos, and as always, and again, thank you all so much for supporting this channel. Take care, and I'll see you all in the next one.